There is a moment in Season 8 of The Simpsons where Mulder and Scully from The X-Files are standing in Springfield, and it feels so completely natural that you forget you are watching two completely different shows share a single frame. That moment did not happen by accident. It happened because somebody sat down and figured out exactly how to make two worlds fit together without either one losing what made it worth watching in the first place. Not every Simpsons crossover managed that. Some of them are genuinely brilliant. Some of them are strange in ways that still hold up. Some of them were television events that 10 million people watched and almost nobody calls their favorite. And one of them is an episode so obscure in its reference point that most people who watched it had no idea they were watching a crossover at all. Tonight, get comfortable. We are going through all of them. The good, the complicated, and everything in between. Welcome to Yellowfan. The Springfield Files, Season 8, Episode 10, 1997, when the X-Files came to Springfield. There is a moment in Season 8 of The Simpsons where Homer Simpson, drunk and stumbling home through the woods at night, comes face to face with a glowing figure that reaches out toward him and says, in a soft and eerie voice, "Don't be afraid." Homer, naturally, screams and runs. That single moment, a panicked, out-of-breath Homer sprinting through dark trees while something alien and glowing watches him go, is the starting gun for what most fans and critics agree is the greatest crossover episode The Simpsons ever produced. It is called The Springfield Files. It aired on January 12, 1997, and it did something that almost no television episode had ever done before it. It took two completely different shows, two completely different tones, two completely different worlds, and fused them together so smoothly that you genuinely forgot you were watching a crossover at all. To understand why this episode works as well as it does, you have to understand what The X-Files was in 1997. It was not just a popular show, it was a cultural event. Every Friday night, tens of millions of people sat down to watch FBI agents Fox Mulder and Dana Scully investigate alien sightings, government conspiracies, and things that science could not explain. Mulder was the believer, the one who thought aliens were real and that the government was hiding the truth. Scully was the skeptic, the scientist who needed proof before she would accept anything. Their back and forth was the engine of the whole show, and America was obsessed with it. The Simpsons saw that obsession and did what The Simpsons did better than any show on television. It turned it into something ridiculous, warm, and surprisingly smart all at the same time. The setup is simple. Homer drinks too much at Moe's Tavern one Friday night, which, if you have watched more than 3 episodes of The Simpsons, already tells you this is going to go sideways. On his walk home through the forest, he sees the glowing figure. He tells his family. Nobody believes him. He goes to the police. Nobody believes him. And so, in desperation, he calls the FBI. And that is when Mulder and Scully show up in Springfield. Now here is where the episode does something genuinely clever. In the real X-Files, Mulder is the one who always believes in the alien, and Scully is the one who says no, there has to be a logical explanation. The Simpsons flips this completely. When Mulder hears Homer's story, even he doesn't buy it. Homer is so obviously unreliable, so clearly the kind of person who would see a glowing alien after 8 beers, that even the most enthusiastic alien believer on television cannot get behind the claim. Scully, meanwhile, is quietly running tests and gathering evidence. That single reversal is a piece of writing that takes real thought. It is not just sticking X-Files characters into a Simpsons episode and hoping the joke lands. It is actually understanding what makes those characters work and then finding the funniest possible version of them in this specific situation. David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson both came back to voice their characters. This matters more than it might seem. When a crossover like this happens, there is always the risk that the guest actors phone it in, that they show up, read their lines, collect a check, and leave. Duchovny and Gillian Anderson did not do that. Their performances feel genuine. Mulder sounds exactly like Mulder. Scully sounds exactly like Scully. And because of that, when they are standing next to Homer and Bart in Springfield, the comedy works. But the episode did not stop at just bringing in Mulder and Scully. Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock in Star Trek, was brought in to narrate the episode. He introduces the story with this deep, serious, mysterious voice, as if what you are about to watch is a real documentary about alien encounters. And then the camera cuts to Homer eating a sandwich in a very stupid way, and the contrast is so funny it almost doesn't seem real. Nimoy's narration runs throughout the episode, adding this layer of fake seriousness that makes every joke hit harder than it would on its own. There is also a running gag about a billboard near Springfield that reads, "Diet." Every time Homer drives past it, the camera lingers just long enough for you to notice that if you remove one letter, it says die. Homer drives past it multiple times across the episode. The joke never changes. It never needs to. And then there is Homer's retelling of the bus that couldn't slow down. When Mulder asks Homer to describe exactly what he saw, Homer launches into a recap that is so hilariously wrong, so scrambled and confused, that it tells you more about Homer's brain in 30 seconds than a whole episode of character study could. He is not lying. He genuinely believes what he is saying. He just cannot accurately describe anything. The episode builds toward a Friday night reveal, because in the show, the glowing figure only appears on Friday nights. The whole town gathers in the woods to finally see what Homer saw. And they do see it. Something glowing and strange and otherworldly walks out of the trees toward them. And then it turns out to be Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns, Homer's boss, had been receiving so many medical treatments at the Springfield nuclear power plant that his body had become slightly radioactive and bioluminescent, meaning he literally glowed in the dark. He was not an alien. He was just a very old, very sick, very powerful man who walked through the woods on Friday nights because the cool air helped him feel better. The crowd, instead of being disappointed, erupts in joy. They sing a song. Mr. Burns, confused and blinking in the middle of a crowd of cheering Springfield residents, has absolutely no idea what is happening. It is one of the warmest endings the show has ever produced, and it arrives at the end of what was essentially an alien conspiracy episode. The episode won an Annie Award, which is one of the most important awards in animation. Al Jean and Mike Reiss, two of the most respected writers in Simpsons history, won for producing this episode. That is not a small thing. The Annie Award recognized what anyone who has watched the episode already feels, that it represents animation at a level most shows do not reach. What makes the Springfield Files the best Simpsons crossover ever made is not just that it is funny, though it is very funny. It is that it respects both shows. It does not make Mulder and Scully look stupid. It does not dumb down the X-Files references to the point where they mean nothing. It trusts the audience to know both worlds well enough to appreciate what is happening in the gap between them. And it builds an actual story around the crossover. A story with a beginning, a middle, and an ending that pays off in a way that feels both surprising and completely right. Homer thought he saw an alien. He did not. He saw his boss. And somehow, in the hands of writers who genuinely understood what they were doing, that simple, silly truth became one of the most beloved half hours in the history of television. There is a version of this episode that could have been lazy. There is a version where Mulder and Scully show up, make a few jokes, and disappear. There is a version where Leonard Nimoy's narration is just a gimmick with no comedic purpose. There is a version where the resolution, "Oh, it was just Mr. Burns," feels like a letdown instead of a triumph. The writers did not make that version. They made the one where every single piece of the crossover had a reason to exist. Every X-Files element was there because it made the Simpsons story better, not just because it was recognizable. That discipline, using the other show to improve your own story rather than just trading on the recognition, is the thing that separates a great crossover from a mediocre one. And it is the reason that almost 30 years after it aired, when people talk about the greatest things The Simpsons ever did, the Springfield Files is always in the conversation. It set the bar. It set it very high. __quote _0 ___. And the next crossover on this list is the one that almost did not happen at all. The one where the creator of The Simpsons was so uncomfortable with what his own show was doing that he walked away from it entirely, refused to put his name on it, and let it air without him. It became a fan favorite anyway. Section 2, A Star is Burns. Season 6, Episode 18, 1995. The Crossover. Matt Groening refused to put his name on. Matt Groening created The Simpsons. He built Springfield from nothing. He drew Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa on a piece of paper in a waiting room in 1987, and what came from that piece of paper became one of the most successful television shows in history. So when Matt Groening decided that a specific episode of his own show was something he did not want his name attached to, that was not a small thing. That was the creator of the show saying out loud to anyone who would listen, "I do not want to be associated with this." The episode was A Star is Burns. It aired on March 5th, 1995 in Season 6. And the reason Groening pulled his name from the credits was not because the episode was badly written or offensive or embarrassing in the way that some television moments are. It was because he felt that his show was being used as an advertisement for a different show, a show on the same network, a show that he felt was being kept alive partly by borrowing the audience and the goodwill that The Simpsons had spent years building. That other show was called The Critic. The Critic was an animated show about a pompous New York film critic named Jay Sherman, who spent most of his time watching movies and dismissing them with the catchphrase, "It stinks." The show was created by Al Jean and Mike Reiss, two writers who had worked closely with Groening on The Simpsons. It ran for 2 seasons, first on ABC, then on Fox, before being canceled. By the time A Star is Burns was being made, The Critic had already been canceled once and was on shaky ground. Groening's concern was specific. He believed that bringing Jay Sherman into a Simpsons episode was not really a creative decision. He thought it was a business decision, a way for Fox to use the popularity of The Simpsons to draw attention back to The Critic and keep it alive. He felt that the integrity of his show was being traded away for someone else's benefit, and so he went public with his objection, told the press exactly how he felt, and had his name removed from the episode's credits. It is one of the most unusual things that has ever happened in the history of The Simpsons. The man who created the show refused to be credited on one of its episodes. His name simply does not appear in the opening credits of A Star is Burns, and the reason is not a technical mistake or an accident. It is a statement. All of that behind-the-scenes tension is worth knowing before you watch the episode, because the episode itself tells an almost completely different story. It is funny, it is warm, it holds up, and Jay Sherman, the character Groening did not want on his show, fits into Springfield so naturally that if you did not know the history, you would never guess he was the center of a genuine argument between creative people who respected each other. The plot is straightforward in the best possible Simpsons way. Springfield has been named the worst city in America. Not just bad, not just near the bottom, but the actual single worst place in the country. The town decides to fix its reputation by hosting a film festival. Marge, who is often the person in the Simpson family who genuinely tries to make things better, suggests inviting a real professional film critic to serve as the head judge. That critic is Jay Sherman. Jon Lovitz voiced Jay Sherman, and this is one of those casting decisions that works better than anyone had a right to expect. Lovitz had already appeared on The Simpsons before. He had a recurring presence on the show, so his voice was familiar to the audience. But as Jay Sherman, he brings something specific, a character who is genuinely convinced that he has better taste than everyone around him, and who is not entirely wrong, but who delivers that conviction in a way that is so exhausting and self-important that you understand immediately why Homer cannot stand him. Homer cannot stand him from the moment he arrives. This is important because Homer is the audience's anchor in most Simpsons episodes. When Homer likes someone, we tend to like them too. When Homer does not like someone, we are primed to look at that person with some suspicion. Homer decides almost immediately that Jay Sherman is annoying, pretentious, and not welcome in his house. The fact that Sherman is correct about most of his opinions about film does not matter to Homer at all. The film festival itself is where the episode really opens up. Springfield residents submit their short films to be judged, and what follows is a parade of sketches that show exactly what the golden era of The Simpsons did better than almost any other animated show. It built a world so full of specific, real-feeling characters that you could drop any of them into the spotlight for 2 minutes and they would carry the scene completely. Barney Guthrie, Springfield's resident drunk, a man who has appeared in dozens of episodes as background color, submits a short film called Pocahontas. It is a black and white film about his struggle with alcoholism. It is beautiful and quiet and sad, and it is played completely straight. No joke is made at Barney's expense. The film within the show is treated as genuine art, and the audience inside the episode, and watching at home, responds to it as such. Barney's film is the emotional heart of A Star is Burns, which is a remarkable thing to say about a side character in a crossover episode that is ostensibly about a film critic from another show. Mr. Burns, who has more money than everyone else in Springfield combined, takes a different approach. He hires a professional film crew, brings in the best equipment money can buy, and produces a lavish epic about himself, specifically designed to win first place. He calls his director Signor Spielbergo, a name that is exactly as funny as it sounds. Burns is not interested in art. He is interested in winning. And when Sherman refuses to be impressed or swayed by the budget or the spectacle, Burns is genuinely baffled. He cannot understand why his money is not simply working. And then there is the winner. The film that takes first place at the Springfield Film Festival is not Barney's quiet and heartbreaking documentary. It is not Burns's expensive vanity project. It is a submission from Hans Moleman, one of Springfield's smallest, most frequently overlooked, most consistently unfortunate background characters, called Man Getting Hit by Football. It is exactly what it sounds like. Hans Moleman gets hit in the groin by a football. That is the entire film, and it wins. Homer, who is one of the judges, voted for it. His reasoning, delivered with complete sincerity, it spoke to him on a personal level. That joke, Barney's beautiful, genuine film losing to a man getting hit in the groin, is one of the sharpest things the episode does. It is not just funny, it is a comment on how audiences actually work, on the gap between what critics think should be celebrated and what regular people actually respond to. The Simpsons was always good at this kind of joke, the kind where the funny thing and the true thing are exactly the same thing. Sherman, throughout all of this, is a surprisingly good guest character. He is snobbish without being a villain. He has standards without being cruel. When he recognizes that Barney's film is genuinely moving, he says so clearly and without reservation. He is not wrong about much, even when the people around him find him insufferable. And there is a scene between Sherman and Lisa, two characters who both care more about culture and ideas than anyone else around them, that lands quietly and warmly in a way way that does not call attention to itself. The argument at the center of the episode, Homer versus Sherman, sincerity versus pretension, man getting hit by football versus Pocahontas, is also a version of the argument Matt Groening was having with his own network in real life. Groening did not want his show reduced to a vehicle for someone else's goals. He wanted it to mean something on its own terms. And the episode, perhaps without intending to, dramatizes exactly that tension. Burns trying to buy the festival's outcome is Fox trying to use The Simpsons to save the critic. Homer insisting that man getting hit by football is great is the audience refusing to be told what to like. Sherman insisting on his standards is Groening refusing to give them up. Whether or not the writers intended any of that, it is there. It is all there, and it makes the episode richer than a simple crossover between two animated Fox shows has any right to be. The Critic was canceled anyway. It did not survive, despite the exposure. The episode did not save it. But A Star is Burns survived, and it survived well. The Boo Earns scene, where Burns mishears the crowd chanting boo and insists they are saying Boo Earns, as in they are saying his name with enthusiasm, became one of the most quoted moments in Simpsons history. It became a meme long before anyone used that word. It spread because it is the perfect joke. Burns' ego is so enormous that he literally cannot hear criticism. That joke comes from a crossover episode that the show's own creator did not want to make. That is the strange and contradictory legacy of A Star is Burns. It exists because of a business decision Groening hated. It contains one of the funniest moments the show ever produced. Its creator refused to put his name on it, and fans have loved it for 30 years anyway. Groening did not have his name on the episode, but his fingerprints are all over it. The warmth is his. The sharpness is his. The idea that a man getting hit in the groin can beat a piece of genuine art in a public competition, and that this is both funny and a little bit devastating, is exactly the kind of thing The Simpsons, under his watch, did better than anyone. He walked away from the credits. He could not walk away from the show. Quote, one, __. And what came next on this list is, in some ways, the most anticipated crossover in the entire history of The Simpsons. Two worlds built by the same person, kept separate for years, finally brought together. It had every reason to be spectacular. What it actually turned out to be is a little more complicated than that. Section 3, Simpsorama, Season 26, Episode 6, 2014. Matt Groening's two worlds finally collide. There is a title card at the very beginning of Simpsorama that tells you exactly what you are about to watch. It appears on screen before the story starts, before any character says a single word, before Bender shows up in the basement or the time travel plot kicks in, or Homer and a robot from the future become best friends over a shared love of beer. The title card reads, "A show out of ideas teams up with a show out of episodes." That is the show making a joke about itself before it has even started. The Simpsons, by season 26, have been running for over 2 decades. Futurama, Matt Groening's other animated show, had just ended its run, canceled for the second and final time in 2013, 1 year before this episode aired. So when Simpsorama described itself as a show out of ideas, teaming up with a show out of episodes, it was being honest in the specific way that The Simpsons, at its best, has always been honest. Openly, with a joke, and without apology. The fact that this crossover took as long as it did is worth pausing on. Futurama premiered in 1999. The Simpsons had been on the air since 1989. Both shows were created by Matt Groening. Both shows aired on Fox. Both shows featured animated characters in a world that was funny and strange and occasionally surprisingly moving. The two shows existed in the same creative universe, made by many of the same people, watched by enormous numbers of the same fans, for 15 years before they ever shared a single episode together. 15 years. That is not an accident. Groening had always maintained a deliberate separation between the two shows. In the world of The Simpsons, Futurama is a television show set in the future, something that exists in Springfield's culture rather than alongside it. In the world of Futurama, The Simpsons is a 1,000-year-old television program from ancient history. There is even a Futurama episode where Fry and Bender come across a pile of old Bart Simpson dolls in a garbage heap, treated like relics from a lost civilization. The two shows knew about each other, they just did not share a universe. Simpsorama decided not to worry about any of that. The episode aired on November 9th, 2014. The story begins at Springfield Elementary, where the children are burying a time capsule. Bart, being Bart, throws a disgusting sandwich into the capsule along with a rabbit's foot. These two items, buried in the ground and left to sit for 1,000 years, combine with Bart's DNA and eventually produce mutant rabbit creatures that overrun the future city of New York, where Futurama takes place. The Planet Express crew, Fry, Leela, Bender, Professor Farnsworth, Amy, Hermes, and Zoidberg, travel back in time to Springfield to stop the problem at its source. Their solution, at least initially, is to kill Homer. Bender arrives first. He appears in the Simpsons' basement, holding a note from his future self that reads, "I am Bender. Please insert girder." The family is baffled. Bender is baffled by the family. And then the rest of the Planet Express crew shows up. The time travel explanation is given, and Springfield and the year 3000 are suddenly sharing the same space. The casting decisions for this episode were serious ones. Every major Futurama voice actor returned to play their character. Billy West voiced Fry, Katie Seagal voiced Leela, John DiMaggio voiced Bender, Phil LaMarr voiced Hermes, Lauren Tom voiced Amy, Maurice LaMarche voiced Kiff, David Herman voiced various characters. These were not replacement voices or sound-alikes. The actual cast of Futurama came back, 1 year after their show ended, to play their characters one more time inside a Simpsons episode. That matters because voice acting and animation is not interchangeable. A character's voice is a fundamental part of who they are. When John DiMaggio says something as Bender, the confidence and aggression and strange warmth underneath all of it is specific to DiMaggio's performance. Nobody else sounds like that. The fact that the episode brought back the whole cast rather than recasting or reducing the Futurama characters to minor background appearances tells you something about how seriously the creative team took the responsibility of the crossover. The emotional core of the episode, if it has one, is Homer and Bender. The show makes the comparison between them gently but clearly. Both are large and round. Both have an enormous love of food and drink. Both are fundamentally lazy in ways that sometimes tip into something more interesting. Both are surrounded by people who are smarter or more capable than they are, and both somehow end up at the center of everything anyway. When Bender arrives in the Simpsons' basement and Homer offers him a beer, the moment works because it feels completely natural, like two characters who were always supposed to meet, even if they never quite did. There's a scene where Homer and Bender sit in the basement drinking together, and Bart and Lisa observe that Homer and the robot have a lot in common. The show is not subtle about this. It is making the connection directly, letting the characters themselves notice it, which is a more honest approach than pretending the similarities do not exist. The Simpsons does not always earn its emotional moments in the later seasons. This one it earns, because it is built on something true about both characters. Maggie also gets a significant subplot. She ends up alone with Bender in present-day Springfield, while the rest of the families travel to the future to deal with the mutant rabbit problem. Maggie, who almost never gets storylines of her own, spends her time dragging Bender around Springfield to various locations, including a racetrack. Bender, who is a robot from the future, finds himself babysitting an infant who cannot talk and who seems completely unbothered by the fact that her babysitter is made made of metal. Their scenes together are quiet and strange and consistently funny. The design of the episode also did something worth noticing. The Futurama characters, when they appear in Springfield, are drawn in the Simpsons visual style rather than their own. They look like Simpsons characters, the rounded shapes, the overbite mouths, the simple lines. This was a deliberate choice, and it creates a visual consistency that makes the episode feel unified rather than patchwork. If the Futurama characters had appeared in their own animation style inside a Simpsons episode, it would have created a visual disconnect every time they were on screen. Instead, everyone exists in the same world, drawn the same way, which is a small creative decision with a large payoff. When the families travel to the future, the show gets to do something it rarely can: put the Simpsons in a world that is not Springfield. The future version of New New York, which fans of Futurama know well, is rendered in the Simpsons style, and there is genuine pleasure in seeing familiar future landmarks filtered through Springfield's visual language. It does not last long. The episode is a normal half hour, which is not a lot of time for 2 entire shows to share. But while it is happening, it feels like a genuine gift to fans of both shows. The mutant rabbit creatures, which are the villain of the episode in the loosest possible sense, look like small versions of Bart. They have his spiky hair and his basic shape. They are the result of his DNA mixing with food and time, which is both a good science fiction premise and an accurate description of what prolonged exposure to Bart Simpson does to the world around him. The creatures are not threatening in any traditional sense. They are just endlessly multiplying small Barts, which is arguably more disturbing than a standard villain. The resolution involves the Simpsons helping to clean up the future problem that Bart accidentally caused, which is when the problem is solved and the Planet Express crew prepares to return to the year 3000, Homer and Bender's goodbye is brief and warm and does not overplay the emotion. They are friends in the way that 2 people who spent a single afternoon together can be friends. Not deeply, not permanently, but genuinely. Now, the honest version of discussing Simpsorama requires saying clearly that the episode is not perfect. It is not the Springfield Files. It does not have the emotional weight of A Star is Burns, or the format-breaking ambition of some other Simpsons crossovers. The plot moves quickly enough that the character interactions sometimes feel rushed. You want more time with Fry and Bart, more time with Leela and Marge, more of the Futurama crew experiencing Springfield in ways that reveal something about either show. The 30-minute runtime is a genuine limitation here. 2 universes with this much history and this many characters needed more space than one episode could give them. But what Simpsorama does right, it does right without apology. It is funny. It is warm. It does not embarrass either show. It treats the Futurama characters with the same respect and affection that the Futurama writers themselves brought to those characters over 14 years of episodes and movies. And the Homer and Bender dynamic, brief as it is, delivers exactly what the audience wanted from it. The opening title card, a show out of ideas, teaming up with a show out of episodes, turned out to be more generous to itself than it needed to be. The episode is not the work of a show out of ideas. It is the work of a show that has been running long enough to have tried almost everything, finding one more thing worth trying. 2 worlds that the same person built, kept deliberately separate for 15 years, finally sharing a half hour of television. The result is not perfect. It is not the greatest Simpsons crossover, but it is something that fans of both shows had wanted for a very long time, and it arrived with enough warmth and humor and genuine affection for both sets of characters that the wanting was worth it. Groening built 2 universes. He kept them apart on purpose. And then, for 22 minutes on a November night in 2014, he let them breathe the same air. __quote_2___. What comes next is the crossover that arrived 15 years after Simpsorama should have. A 44-minute collision between Springfield and Quahog that 10 million people watched, that critics could not agree on, and that put two of the most famous animated families in television history in the same room for the first time. It had every reason to be the best crossover ever made. What actually happened when Homer Simpson met Peter Griffin is a story worth telling carefully. Section 4. The Simpsons Guy. Family Guy Season 13, Episode 1, 2014. The 44-minute crossover nobody could agree on. 10 million people watched it. That number is worth sitting with for a moment before anything else gets said about The Simpsons Guy. 10 million people tuned in on September 28, 2014, to watch the Griffin family from Family Guy cross paths with the Simpson family from The Simpsons. It was the most watched episode of Family Guy in years. It broke records for the network. By every measure that television uses to decide whether something was a success, how many people watched, how much attention it generated, how long people talked about it afterward, The Simpsons Guy was a massive, undeniable success, and yet almost nobody calls it a great episode. That gap between how many people watched it and how few people loved it is the most interesting thing about The Simpsons Guy. It is an episode that proves you can have enormous reach and deeply divided reviews at exactly the same time. And the reasons for that division are not complicated once you understand what the two shows actually are and what happens when you put them in the same room. The first thing to understand is that The Simpsons Guy is technically not a Simpsons episode at all. It is a Family Guy episode. It is the first episode of Family Guy's 13th season. The story is told from the Griffin family's point of view. The Simpsons are guests in their own crossover, which is an unusual creative decision, and one that shaped almost everything about how the episode turned out. The setup is this. Peter Griffin writes a comic strip that offends the women of Quahog, the fictional Rhode Island town where Family Guy takes place. An angry mob runs the Griffin family out of town. Peter, Lois, Meg, Chris, Stewie, and Brian pile into their car and drive until they run out of gas. They end up stranded in Springfield, and Springfield, being Springfield, welcomes them with the specific brand of chaotic warmth that the town has always extended to strangers. Homer meets Peter almost immediately, and the two of them get along in the way that two enormous, loud, impulsive, food-obsessed fathers in animated sitcoms naturally would. They drink together, they eat together, they wander around Springfield together doing the kinds of things Homer normally does with Barney. The show acknowledges, fairly directly, that Homer and Peter are similar characters, both big men with big appetites and limited self-awareness, who somehow maintain the love of their families despite being genuinely difficult to live with. The episode does not pretend this similarity does not exist. It makes the similarity part of the joke. Bart and Stewie meet, and their dynamic is one of the episode's more interesting experiments. Bart is mischievous and rebellious, but fundamentally good-hearted. Stewie is a toddler who speaks in a sophisticated accent and spent the early years of Family Guy trying to murder his own mother. They are not the same kind of troublemaker at all, and the episode uses that difference reasonably well. Stewie is impressed by Bart's prank phone calls to Moe's Tavern, a running Simpsons gag where Bart calls the bar and asks for people with names like Amanda Hug-and-Kiss, causing Moe to repeat the name to a bar full of people who then laugh at him. When Stewie tries his own version of the prank, it goes further and darker than Bart's version ever did, which tells you something clear about the difference between the two characters and the two shows. Lisa and Meg find each other, and their meeting is quietly one of the more honest moments in the episode. Both of them are the overlooked daughter in their respective families. Both of them are smarter and more sensitive than the people around them tend to recognize. Lisa takes Meg under her wing, which is both sweet and a little heartbreaking because anyone who knows Family Guy knows that Meg's situation at home is significantly worse than Lisa's in ways that the show treats as a source of comedy rather than concern. Lisa being kind to Meg works because it is exactly what Lisa would do, and it highlights, without spelling it out, the difference in how the two shows treat their female characters. Marge and Lois connect as well, though their scenes together are less developed than the other pairings. Both are the responsible adult women in households run by irresponsible men. They recognize each other immediately. Their scenes are brief enough that they do not go anywhere particularly interesting, which is a missed opportunity given how much both characters have to offer. The plot, such as it is, eventually involves Peter discovering that the Pawtucket Brewery back in Quahog has been selling an unauthorized copy of Duff Beer, Homer's beloved fictional beer brand. This leads to a legal case, which leads to a courtroom scene, which leads to a chicken fight. The chicken fight is a Family Guy thing. In Family Guy, Peter has a recurring nemesis named Ernie the Giant Chicken, and periodically the two of them engage in extended, violent, elaborately choreographed fights that go on for several minutes and destroy everything around them. It is a beloved Family Guy gag. When Homer and Peter's legal dispute turns into a physical fight that mirrors the chicken fight format, it is the episode doing what crossovers are supposed to do, taking something specific to one show and finding a way to use it in the other show's context. The fight goes on for a long time. It is well animated and committed to its own logic. Whether it is funny depends almost entirely on whether you find the original chicken fight format funny, which Family Guy fans tend to and Simpsons fans tend not to. That is the central problem of the Simpsons Guy, and it is a problem built into the DNA of what the episode is. Family Guy and The Simpsons are both animated comedies about families. They both air on Fox. They have both been on television for a very long time. But the way they make jokes, the way they treat their characters, and the values they operate from are genuinely different from each other. The Simpsons, especially in its best years, is a warm show. It makes fun of its characters, but it loves them. When Homer does something stupid, the show finds him funny, but it does not hate him for being stupid. When Marge is frustrated, the show takes her frustration seriously, even while finding comedy in the situation. The world of Springfield is absurd, but it operates from a foundation of genuine affection for the people in it. Family Guy operates differently. It is sharper and meaner, and more willing to make its characters the target of real cruelty for the sake of a joke. The humor comes from a different place, less warmth, more edge, more willingness to be uncomfortable. This is not a criticism. Family Guy has its own strengths and its own devoted audience. But those strengths and that audience are built on a sensibility that is genuinely different from the Simpsons sensibility. When you put those two sensibilities in the same episode, they do not automatically blend. They rub against each other. Moments that would work in a Family Guy episode feel wrong in the Simpsons context. Moments that work in the Simpsons context feel soft or slow in the Family Guy format. The episode is 44 minutes long, twice the length of a normal episode of either show, and that length gives the tonal clash more room to become visible. The episode's writers were aware of this tension. The script has several moments where the characters acknowledge, essentially, that this crossover is a strange idea. At one point, Homer turns to Peter and says something along the lines of, "You know, we are a lot alike." And Peter says, "Yeah, but you were around first." The show knows. It has always known that Family Guy drew comparisons to The Simpsons from the moment it premiered. Putting that acknowledgement in the episode's script is a way of diffusing the criticism by owning it first. Whether that diffusing works is a matter of personal taste. Some viewers found it charming, others found it irritating. The equivalent of someone pointing out that they are doing something wrong as a way of excusing themselves from having to fix it. What the episode does well is spectacle. It is big and loud and it moves fast, and it gives fans of both shows a lot of moments they can point to and say, yes, I saw those characters share a screen. For 10 million people watching on a Sunday night in 2014, that was enough. The experience of seeing Homer and Peter eat at the same table, seeing Bart and Stewie scheme together, seeing the animation styles of both shows in the same frame, that experience has a value that is separate from whether the jokes land or the story holds together. The episode ends with the Griffin family leaving Springfield. As they drive away, Peter looks back at Springfield and says something about what a nice place it is. Homer watches them go. There is a beat, brief, not overly sentimental, and then the episode ends. The families do not stay in each other's lives. The crossover closes. Springfield goes back to being Springfield, and Quahog goes back to being Quahog. That separation feels right. The episode understood, even if it could not fully solve, the fundamental incompatibility at the heart of the crossover it was making. These two shows come from different places. They were built by different people with different instincts and different ideas about what comedy is supposed to do. Putting them together for 44 minutes was an event. What it could not quite be, despite its enormous audience and its genuine ambition, was a great episode of either show. 10 million people watched it. Most of them had a good enough time. Almost none of them call it their favorite Simpsons crossover. That is The Simpsons Guy. A massive television event that proved something important. The size of the audience and the quality of the episode are two completely different things. And sometimes the thing that gets the most attention is not the thing that deserves it most. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And speaking of deserving, the next crossover on this list is one that does not get nearly enough credit. It is an episode where The Simpsons did not just reference another show or bring in characters from another universe, it became another show entirely. It threw out its own opening credits, abandoned its own format, and spent 22 minutes pretending to be one of the most intense dramas on television, set in a school where the biggest threat was a stink bomb at a bake sale. Section 5, 24 minutes, Season 18, Episode 21, 2007, the show that became another show. Most crossover episodes bring a guest into the house. A character from another show walks through the door, interacts with the regular cast, and eventually leaves. The world of the host show stays the same. The rules stay the same. The format stays the same. You recognize where you are at every moment because the show keeps looking and sounding like itself, even with a visitor inside it. 24 Minutes did not do that. 24 Minutes, which aired on May 20th, 2007, as the 21st episode of Season 18, did not bring a guest into The Simpsons. It turned The Simpsons into something else entirely. For 22 minutes, the show abandoned its own identity and became a full, committed, deliberately accurate imitation of 24, one of the most popular and intense drama shows on American television at the time. It changed its look. It changed its structure. It changed the way it moved and the way it sounded. It even removed the traditional couch gag from the opening, which is one of the most recognizable elements of any Simpsons episode and something the show almost never drops. To understand why that was such a bold decision, you have to understand what 24 was and what it meant to the audience watching television in 2007. 24 was a Fox drama series about a counterterrorism agent named Jack Bauer, played by Kiefer Sutherland. The show's central idea was that each episode represented 1 hour of real time in a single day, and each season covered one complete day in Jack Bauer's life. The clock was always running. The stakes were always enormous. Jack Bauer was always trying to stop something catastrophic, a bomb, a biological weapon, an assassination, with very little time and very few people he could trust. The show was relentless. It was tense in a way that most television was not. It made the audience feel like every second mattered, because the format insisted that every second did. Part of what made 24 so recognizable was its visual style. The show used split screens constantly, multiple images on screen at the same time, showing different characters in different locations, all dealing with the same crisis simultaneously. A digital clock appeared on screen regularly, counting down the seconds. The music was urgent and driving. The camera moved quickly. Everything about the show's presentation was designed to create the feeling of time running out. 24 Minutes took all of that and put it in Springfield Elementary School. The plot of the episode is this. Principal Skinner, in what the show presents as a deeply questionable decision, creates a counter-truancy unit at Springfield Elementary. The unit is made up of students. Bart and Lisa are both involved. The crisis they are facing is that Nelson and his crew of bullies are planning to detonate a stink bomb at the school's bake sale. This is the threat. This is the ticking clock. A stink bomb at a bake sale. The genius of the episode is how completely and seriously it commits to treating this threat with the same urgency that 24 brought to nuclear weapons and terrorist attacks. The split screens are there, the digital clock is there, the driving music is there. Characters communicate through headsets and speak in urgent whispers about intelligence and field operatives and the threat being neutralized. The visual language of one of the most intense dramas on television is being used, without irony, to track the movement of a middle school stink bomb. That gap between the style and the stakes is where all the comedy lives. And because the episode commits so completely to the style, the comedy works better than it would if the show had kept winking at the audience. The funniest version of this joke is the one where nobody inside the episode thinks it is funny. Skinner treats the counter-truancy unit like a genuine military operation. Bart and Lisa take their roles seriously. The bullies plan their stink bomb deployment with the kind of focus that would be impressive if they were not 11 years old. The show refuses to break from its premise, and that refusal is what makes the premise funny. Kiefer Sutherland came back to voice Jack Bauer. This is not a small thing. Sutherland was at the peak of his popularity in 2007. Jack Bauer was one of the most famous characters on television, and Sutherland had won a Golden Globe for playing him. For him to show up in a Simpsons parody of his own show, to voice the character he was famous for in a context that was deliberately making that character look absurd by comparison, required a genuine willingness to be in on the joke. Mary Lynn Ricecub also returned as Chloe O'Brien, Bauer's most trusted colleague from the real 24. In the show, Chloe was the technical expert, the person at the computer who fed Bauer information, tracked targets, and managed crises from a distance. In 24 minutes, her phone line gets crossed with Bart's, which is how Jack Bauer ends up accidentally connected to a middle schooler's counter-truancy operation. The mix-up is brief and perfectly timed, and it treats the absurdity of the situation with the same seriousness that 24 would bring to an actual intelligence failure. What Sutherland and Ricecub do in their appearances is crucial. They do not play the joke, they play the characters. Jack Bauer in 24 minutes sounds exactly like Jack Bauer in 24. The same controlled urgency, the same clipped sentences, the same sense that every word he says is being measured against a ticking clock. Because Sutherland plays it straight, the comedy of the situation lands harder than it would if he had softened the performance to signal to the audience that, yes, he knows this is funny. The episode also uses the split screen format with real creativity. In 24, the split screen exists to show you multiple locations and multiple characters dealing with the same crisis at the same time, reinforcing the feeling that everything is connected and everything is happening at once. 24 minutes uses the same split screen format, but fills the boxes with things like Bart eating a sandwich, Nelson practicing looking menacing, and Principal Skinner staring at a map of the school hallways with the intense focus of a general planning a military campaign. The form is exact. The content is ridiculous. The contrast is the joke. There is a specific moment in the episode where the clock is counting down, the music is building, the split screens are cycling through various characters in crisis, and the camera cuts to Homer, who is completely unconnected to any of the plot and is simply sitting at home doing something mundane. Homer does not know there is a stink bomb situation at his children's school. Homer does not know there is a counter-truancy unit. Homer is just Homer, existing in the middle of an episode that is stylistically about as far from a normal Homer storyline as the show has ever gotten. His presence is a reminder that Springfield is still Springfield, even when the show is pretending to be something else. The episode was made during what many fans call the HD era of The Simpsons, the period after season 20 when the show upgraded to high definition and a widescreen format, which brought with it both sharper animation and a different visual feel. Among the episodes from this later period, 24 Minutes is consistently ranked among the strongest, and the reason is exactly the ambition that drives it. Most Simpsons episodes in the later seasons work within the show's established format. 24 Minutes throws the format out and replaces it with someone else's format, and then uses that foreign format to make Simpsons jokes that the original format could not have made. The stink bomb, when it finally becomes relevant to the climax, is handled with the kind of dramatic weight that 24 would give to an actual weapon of mass destruction. Characters race against the clock. The situation seems hopeless. Bart, who is often the wild card in any Springfield crisis, ends up being essential to the resolution in a way that feels true to who he is. The bake sale is saved. The stink bomb is neutralized, the counter-truancy unit achieves its objective, and Jack Bauer, somewhere across the split screen, presumably continues saving the actual world from actual threats, unaware that his phone briefly got crossed with a child's. What 24 Minutes understood, and what makes it one of the most interesting crossovers in the show's history, is that the best version of this particular joke was not a version where the characters of 24 came to Springfield. It was a version where Springfield became 24. Bringing Jack Bauer into a normal Simpsons episode would have produced a funny cameo. Turning a Simpsons episode into a 24 episode produced something stranger and more committed and more genuinely creative. The show did not visit another world. It wore another world's clothes. It used another show's entire visual and structural identity as a costume, and then walked around in that costume doing Simpsons things, and the result was 22 minutes that felt unlike anything the show had done before or has quite done since. It remains one of the most formally inventive episodes in the show's long history, not just as a crossover, but as an episode. The couch gag was gone. The familiar opening was gone. The traditional structure was gone. What replaced all of it was something that required the audience to know two shows well enough to appreciate what was being done with both of them, and to find the specific comedy that only exists in the space between a show that moves at 100 miles an hour and a world where the biggest crisis of the week is a bake sale. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next section covers a crossover that went in the completely opposite direction from 24 Minutes. Instead of tension and split screens and urgent music, it gave Springfield something warm and chaotic, and populated with characters that an entire generation grew up watching on Saturday mornings and weekday afternoons. It is the episode where Homer Simpson ran from Mr. Rogers, Big Bird, and the Teletubbies through the streets of his own town, and somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, the show found something genuinely sharp to say about the network that made it. Section 6, Missionary Impossible, Season 11, Episode 15, 2000. Homer vs. PBS and every character you loved as a kid. There is a scene in Missionary Impossible where Homer Simpson is running through the streets of Springfield being chased by a mob. This is not unusual. Homer has been chased by mobs before. Springfield is the kind of town where a mob can form quickly and for reasons that make complete sense within the world of the show. What makes this particular chase scene different from every other chase scene in Simpsons history is who is doing the chasing. Mr. Rogers is chasing him. Big Bird is chasing him. Elmo is chasing him. The Teletubbies are chasing him. Betty White is somewhere in the mix, furious and determined. An entire parade of the most beloved, gentle, warm, and child-friendly characters in the history of American television is sprinting through Springfield with genuine anger, and the target of all that anger is Homer Simpson, who did this to himself in the most Homer way imaginable. That image, soft, friendly, beloved PBS characters transformed into a vengeful mob, is the episode's most famous moment, and it earned its fame. But Missionary Impossible, which aired on February 20th, 2000, as the 15th episode of Season 11, is doing something more interesting than just a funny visual. It is making a real argument about television, about money, about the network that broadcast it, and about the relationship between public broadcasting and commercial television. It is making that argument loudly and with complete commitment, and it is doing it while Homer runs from the Teletubbies. To understand the episode, you have to start with PBS. The Public Broadcasting Service is an American television network that is funded differently from commercial networks like Fox or NBC or CBS. Commercial networks make their money from advertisers. PBS makes its money from the government, from donations, and from pledge drives, periods where they interrupt their regular programming to ask viewers directly to donate money to keep the channel running. If you grew up in America, you know what a PBS pledge drive looks like. A host at a phone bank explaining how much the channel means to the community, asking you to call in and contribute whatever you can. The shows on PBS are different from commercial television. Sesame Street, which features Big Bird and Elmo and a street full of characters teaching children numbers and letters and how to be kind. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, hosted by Fred Rogers, which was one of the gentlest and most genuinely caring programs ever produced for children. Frontline, a serious news documentary program. These are public goods, funded by public support, operating without the profit motive that drives commercial television. Fox, the network that broadcasts The Simpsons, is commercial television. Its owner, Rupert Murdoch, was at the time publicly opposed to public broadcasting in a way that was well known and not especially subtle. The idea that a show on Fox would spend an entire episode praising PBS and mocking Fox's own commercial interests was not a small creative choice. It was a deliberate, pointed act of biting the hand that fed it, a thing The Simpsons did regularly and well throughout its best years. The episode begins with Homer watching one of his favorite shows, a British comedy program, on PBS. A pledge drive interrupts it. Homer cannot watch his show without sitting through the pledge drive first. He gets increasingly frustrated. Finally, in a moment of impulse that anyone who has ever been interrupted by a commercial break will understand on some level, he calls the pledge line and donates $10,000. He does not have $10,000. He does not have anything close to $10,000. He called in the donation purely to make the pledge drive stop so he could watch his show, with no actual intention or ability to pay what he promised. PBS, it turns out, takes these pledges seriously. When Homer cannot produce the money, PBS comes after him. Betty White leads the charge, and this is Betty White in the year 2000, decades before her later career renaissance made her a beloved internet figure, when she was already a television institution with enough authority and presence to make the threat feel real. When Betty White shows up at your door representing an angry PBS, you run. Homer runs, and then the chase begins. The characters who pursue Homer through Springfield are not random. They are the specific characters that PBS is most famous for, the ones that an American audience would recognize instantly and associate with warmth and safety and childhood. Mr. Rogers, Big Bird and Elmo from Sesame Street, the Teletubbies, who were a British children's program that aired on PBS in America and became enormously popular with very young children at the end of the 1990s. The joke is layered. On the surface, it is simple and physical. Gentle characters doing aggressive things is funny because of the contrast. But underneath that, the episode is making a point about what happens when institutions that survive on goodwill and voluntary donations are pushed to their limits. PBS cannot run on broken promises. The pledge drive exists because the channel genuinely needs the money. Homer treating that need as an inconvenience, making a promise he cannot keep just to make the inconvenience go away, has consequences. Those consequences take the form of Elmo wanting his money. Homer escapes by fleeing the country. He ends up in Micronesia, a group of islands in the Pacific Ocean, where he works as a missionary. This is the second half of the episode, and it is a separate story from the PBS crossover. Homer on a remote island trying to do good in a community he does not understand, with results that are chaotic and occasionally catastrophic. The island section is funny in its own right, and gives the episode a scope that goes beyond a single joke sustained for 22 minutes. But the PBS crossover is what people remember, and rightfully so. It is what happens at the very end of the episode that pushes it from good to genuinely smart. The episode closes with a Fox pledge drive. Fox, the commercial network, runs its own version of a PBS pledge drive, asking viewers to donate money to keep Fox on the air. Bart calls in to donate, and Rupert Murdoch himself, voiced by actor Harry Shearer, appearing as himself, picks up the phone and tells Bart that his donation has saved the network. Bart's response? Wouldn't be the first time. That final joke is one of the most self-aware things The Simpsons ever did. Bart Saving Fox is the show acknowledging openly that The Simpsons kept Fox financially viable during its early years. That without the revenue and the audience that The Simpsons generated, Fox as a network might not have survived long enough to become what it became. This was not a secret. It was widely discussed in the television industry. But seeing it said out loud in the show itself by Bart Simpson, with Rupert Murdoch on the other end of the line, is something different from reading it in a trade publication. The show knew what it was worth to its network. It knew that it had leverage that most shows do not have. And it used that knowledge not to demand anything or threaten anything, but to make a joke that was also a statement of fact. Bart saved Fox. The Simpsons saved Fox. And if Fox wanted to run a pledge drive, it would be following in the footsteps of the public broadcasting model it had spent years treating as the competition. The guest appearances in Missionary Impossible are handled differently from most Simpsons crossovers. In the Springfield Files, Mulder and Scully are full characters with dialogue and a role in the plot. In A Star Is Burns, Jay Sherman is central to the story. In Missionary Impossible, the PBS characters are not really characters at all. They are images. They appear as a mob, collectively, and what makes them funny is not anything they say or do individually, but the fact that they exist together in a context completely removed from their natural purpose. Big Bird chasing someone is funny, not because of anything specific about Big Bird as a character, but because Big Bird exists in the cultural imagination as the opposite of threatening. The Teletubbies chasing someone is funny because the Teletubbies, with their round pastel bodies and their screens embedded in their stomachs, and their gentle, unintelligible speech, represent the absolute softest and most non-threatening end of the children's television spectrum. Fred Rogers, whose show was built entirely on the idea that you are good enough exactly as you are, and that feelings are safe to talk about, is perhaps the single most gentle figure in the history of American television. Seeing him run after Homer Simpson is funny in a way that does not require any setup or explanation, because the cultural knowledge is already there. Betty White is slightly different. Betty White was not a children's character. She was a television comedian and actress who had been famous since the 1950s, who had won multiple Emmy Awards, and whose public persona combined warmth with a sharp and slightly dangerous wit. Her presence leading the PBS mob gives it an authority and an edge that Big Bird and Elmo cannot provide on their own. She is not soft, she is not gentle. She is a woman who has been in show business for 50 years, and she wants her $10,000, and she is not going away. The episode belongs to a period of The Simpsons, seasons 9 through 12 or so, that fans argue about more than almost any other. By season 11, the show had passed what most people consider its golden era. The tight, emotionally precise storytelling of seasons 3 through 8 had shifted into something looser and more reliant on spectacle and celebrity. Missionary Impossible is a product of this later period, and it shows some of that period's tendencies. The plot is broader, the stakes are more outlandish, the emotional grounding is lighter. But the episode's central joke is strong enough to carry it, and the Fox pledge drive ending is sharp enough to make it memorable in a way that outlasts its era. It is the rare later season Simpsons episode that has a real idea at its center. Not just a funny situation, but a funny situation that is also making a genuine point about the television industry, about who funds what and why, and about the strange relationship between a show that saved a network and the network that owned it. Homer ran from Mr. Rogers. He ran from Big Bird and Elmo and the Teletubbies and Betty White. He ran all the way to a remote island in the Pacific Ocean rather than pay what he owed to public broadcasting. And in doing so, he accidentally gave The Simpsons one of its most politically pointed half hours, a love letter to PBS wrapped around a chase sequence ending with a Fox pledge drive that made the whole thing loop back on itself in a way that is still funny 25 years later. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next crossover on this list is one that almost nobody thinks about when they talk about The Simpsons, and that is exactly what makes it worth thinking about. It is an episode where Homer wakes up in a world where everything, every building, every car, every person in Springfield is made of plastic bricks. It took 2 full years to make. It required the approval of a toy company, and hidden inside all the bright colors and snapping plastic and elaborate construction sequences is a story about a father who does not want his daughter to grow up, told with more honesty and more heart than most people expect from a Lego episode of a cartoon. Section 7, Brick Like Me, Season 25, Episode 20, 2014. Springfield and Lego, 2 years in the making. The 550th episode of The Simpsons could have been anything. When a television show reaches its 550th episode, it has earned the right to celebrate itself in whatever way it chooses. It could do a clip show, looking back at its greatest moments. It could do a behind-the-scenes special. It could do a straightforward episode that is simply very good, trusting that the milestone speaks for itself. The Simpsons, which has never been a show that takes the easy path when a more interesting path exists, looked at its 550th episode and decided to build Springfield entirely out of Lego bricks. Not as a quick visual gag, not as a couch gag that lasts 30 seconds before the normal episode begins. The entire episode. Every building, every car, every character, every background, every object in every scene. All of it rendered in the blocky, precise, colorful visual style of Lego. Homer Simpson made of plastic bricks. Marge's famous tall hair, constructed from stacked rectangular pieces. The Springfield nuclear power plant, assembled from interlocking components in the specific way that anyone who has ever opened a Lego set immediately recognizes. The episode is called Brick Like Me. It aired on May 4th, 2014. It is the 550th episode of the series, and it took over 2 years to make. A production timeline that is, as the show's own executive producer Matt Selman acknowledged at the time, twice the normal time it takes to produce a Simpsons episode. 2 years for 22 minutes of television. The reason it took that long is not waste or inefficiency. It is the nature of what the episode was attempting. Building Springfield in Lego, visually, accurately, in a way that would satisfy both Simpsons fans and Lego enthusiasts, required an enormous amount of work that a normal animated episode does not require. Every surface had to be designed as a Lego surface. Every character had to be reimagined as a Lego minifigure. The physics of how things move and break and stack in the Lego world had to be established and maintained consistently across the entire episode. The show had never done anything like it, and the tools and the methods to do it had to be developed largely from scratch. The origins of the episode are worth knowing because they are not what you might expect. The crossover between The Simpsons and Lego did not begin with the show's writers coming up with a creative idea. It began with Lego approaching Fox about producing a Lego set of The Simpsons house, a set that would include minifigure versions of Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, and Ned Flanders. That set went on sale in February 2014, a few months before the episode aired. While that merchandise was still being developed, Jill Wilfert, who was the Lego Group's vice president of licensing, pitched a small idea to the Simpsons team. Would they be interested in doing a Lego couch gag? A brief sequence at the start of a normal episode, done in Lego style, in the spot where the couch gag usually goes. A promotional tie-in. A fun visual moment that would last maybe 30 seconds and connect the toy product to the show. The Simpsons team came back with a different answer. Forget the couch gag. Let's do an entire episode. That decision, to turn a 30-second promotional idea into a full 22-minute episode, is the decision that made Brick Like Me what it is. It meant that the Lego crossover had to be a real story, not just a visual exercise. It meant that Homer waking up in a Lego world needed a reason, a meaning, an emotional journey that would justify using this extraordinary visual format rather than just showing off what Lego Springfield looked like. The story they built around it is quieter and more personal than the premise suggests. Homer wakes up in a Springfield where everything and everyone is made of Lego. He does not immediately know how he got there or how to get back. As the episode unfolds, it becomes clear that Homer created this world himself. Not literally, not through any magic or science, but psychologically. He put himself in a Lego Springfield because Lego worlds do not change. Nothing grows. Nothing moves on. Children stay children. Daughters stay daughters. In a Lego world, Lisa will always be exactly the age she is right now, always interested in the same things, always wanting to build with her father in the basement. The real world, the normal cartoon world of The Simpsons, is one where Lisa is growing up. She is developing interests that do not involve Homer. She wants to see a movie with friends her own age rather than enter a Lego building contest with her dad. She is becoming her own person in the gradual, unstoppable way that children become their own people, and Homer is not ready for it. The Lego world is his unconscious response to something he cannot control, his daughter growing up and needing him less. That is the emotional engine of Brick Like Me. Not the visual spectacle, not the Lego brand, not the milestone episode celebration. A father who loves his daughter and is quietly terrified of losing her to the normal passage of time. Executive producer Matt Selman talked about this directly in an interview with TV Guide in April 2014, before the episode aired. He explained that the show spent a long time convincing the creative team that the Lego episode was not just an excuse for the writers, who were, by his own description, major Lego fans who grew up in the 70s, to make Lego jokes. There needed to be a real emotional story there, he said. The Lego format had to serve the story, not the other way around. Al Jean, the show's longtime showrunner, made a similar point. He talked about how the Lego style and the Simpsons style were actually a natural fit, both built on simple, clean designs that are deceptively basic on the surface, but capable of expressing a wide range of things. Homer Simpson is, as Gene noted, basically just eyeballs and a few lines. A Lego minifigure is basically just a cylinder with a printed face. Both achieve their effect through reduction, by taking the human form and stripping it down to the minimum number of elements needed to make it recognizable and expressive. The Lego Group had its own requirements for the episode. Jill Wilford was direct about this. Lego is a company that is careful about how its brand is represented. The Simpsons, which is famous for its satire and its willingness to be sharp and sometimes dark, is not a natural fit for a brand that is primarily associated with children and creativity and family-friendly play. There was negotiation. There was back and forth. The show had to be a little more family-friendly than it might normally be. Lego had to accept that the episode would be edgier than most things the Lego brand is attached to. Wilford acknowledged that this was actually part of the appeal. The episode gave Lego a chance to exist in a slightly edgier context than usual, and it brought younger viewers to The Simpsons who might not have been watching otherwise, viewers who came for the Lego and stayed for everything else Springfield had to offer. The episode has no couch gag. This is notable. The Simpsons almost always has a couch gag. It is one of the most consistent elements of the show's format, the family rushing to sit on the couch at the end of the opening credits, with some variation on the joke each week. Brick Like Me drops the couch gag entirely, and the reason is simple. The entire episode is the visual spectacle that the couch gag would normally provide. There is nothing the couch gag could add to an episode where the opening shot is already a Lego version of Springfield rendered with extraordinary care and detail. The cast of characters in the Lego world is enormous. The show's writers pushed to include as many Springfield residents as possible in the episode, particularly in a church sequence that was designed specifically to give every recognizable character a moment in the Lego format. As Kelly, one of the episode's writers, explained in interviews, they wanted the audience to see their favorites as Lego figures, and they knew that if any beloved character was missing from the episode, fans would notice and would be disappointed, so they pushed to cram everyone in. The result is a sequence that feels like a loving inventory of Springfield's population. Every recurring face, every background character who has accumulated enough history to have a fan base, all rendered in blocky plastic fidelity. Maggie appears in the episode made of Duplo bricks rather than standard Lego bricks. Duplo is the larger version of Lego designed for very young children. The pieces are bigger, simpler, and safer for small hands. In the Lego world, it makes complete sense that the youngest member of the Simpson family would be Duplo rather than Lego. It is a small detail, but it is the kind of small detail that shows how carefully the episode thought through its own internal logic. If you are going to build Springfield out of plastic bricks, you have to follow the rules of the brick world you are building. The episode received strong reviews when it aired. Dennis Perkins, writing for the AV Club, gave it an A- and called it a miracle of an episode. Heartfelt, inventive, exquisitely performed, and tightly written. That is a remarkable description for what is, at its core, a promotional tie-in with a toy company. The fact that Brick Like Me earned that kind of response is a testament to the decision the writers made early in the process. The Lego world has to earn its place by serving a real story about real feelings, or it is just a very expensive visual gimmick. The ending of the episode is where the emotional story completes itself. Homer, faced with the choice between staying in the Lego world where nothing changes and returning to the real world where Lisa will keep growing up, chooses to go home. He opens the Lego castle box he bought for Lisa as a birthday gift, and the act of opening it, of giving the gift rather than keeping the world frozen, is what pulls him back to the real Springfield. He wakes up at the Lego building contest. He tells Lisa about his dream, and instead of trying to keep her close, he tells her she can go to the movie with her friends. He cannot stop her from growing up. He does not want to anymore. It is a simple ending. It does not announce itself as important. Homer makes a decision and the episode ends. And the decision is the kind that parents make every day. The decision to let go a little, to accept that the person you love is becoming more than what they were, to be grateful for what you have instead of frightened of what you might lose. That emotional truth, hidden inside a Lego episode of a long-running cartoon, is what makes Brick Like Me more than its premise. The bricks were the vehicle, the story was the point, and the 2 years it took to make it were worth it. Not because the Lego animation is extraordinary, though it is, but because the show used all that time and all that work to tell something true about a father and a daughter, and the particular kind of love that has to learn to let go. __quote_6___. The next crossover on this list is the one that most fans agree is the weakest of the group. An episode built around a real television competition show with real judges who played themselves that almost everyone who watched it felt was less an episode of The Simpsons and more a commercial for something they were already tired of. It is the story of how Mo Sizlak, Springfield's most miserable bartender, ended up on American Idol, and why the result disappointed almost everyone who watched it. Section 8, Judge Me Tender, Season 21, Episode 23, 2010. Mo on American Idol, and why it mostly didn't work. Every crossover on this list exists because someone made a creative decision. The Springfield Files exists because the writers looked at the X-Files and saw a comedy waiting to be made from its DNA. A Star is Burns exists because Al Jean and Mike Reiss believed Jay Sherman belonged in Springfield, even if Matt Groening disagreed. 24 Minutes exists because someone in the writer's room looked at the most intense drama on television and asked what would happen if the stakes were a stink bomb at a bake sale. Each of those decisions, whatever their complications, came from a place of genuine creative curiosity, a real question about what two worlds could produce when they touched each other. Judge Me Tender is different. Judge Me Tender, which aired on May 23, 2010, as the 23rd and final episode of Season 21, is an episode that most fans and critics agree feels less like a creative decision and more like a business arrangement. It is an episode where Mo Sizlak, Springfield's permanently miserable bartender, becomes a judge on American Idol, the Fox reality competition show where everyday people audition to become a professional singer, judged by a panel of music industry figures who became famous themselves largely for sitting at that judging table. The episode features Simon Cowell, Randy Jackson, Ellen DeGeneres, Cara DiAguardi, and Ryan Seacrest, all playing themselves, all appearing in their roles as American Idol judges and host. These were the actual people sitting at the American Idol judging table in 2010. Their voices are in the episode. Their names are in the credits. The show did not create fictional versions of them or parody versions of them. It brought them in as themselves, in their real professional capacity, and built a Simpsons plot around their actual television show. That is the thing that most clearly separates Judge Me Tender from the other crossovers on this list. When Mulder and Scully appeared in the Springfield Files, the X-Files was the subject of the joke. The comedy came from what happened when the paranormal investigation world of that show collided with the cheerfully absurd reality of Springfield. When Jay Sherman appeared in A Star is Burns, the critic was being referenced and gently mocked even as its main character was being used as a plot device. Even the Family Guy crossover, for all its problems, treated both shows as equals in a collision of two different worlds. Judge Me Tender does not treat American Idol that way. It does not make American Idol the subject of a joke. It does not find the comedy in what happens when Springfield's sensibility collides with American Idol's sensibility. It puts Mo on the judging panel and then essentially shows American Idol doing what American Idol does, with Mo sitting in an extra chair. The show is present but not examined. It is promoted rather than parodied. And for a show with The Simpsons' history of sharp, genuine satire, satire, that choice feels like a significant step back from what the show is capable of. The setup of the episode is actually reasonable on paper. Mo Sislak is one of Springfield's great background characters, a man who has appeared in hundreds of episodes, who runs a bar that is always dark and slightly threatening, who has a voice like gravel and a face that the show has repeatedly established is genuinely difficult to look at. He is deeply unhappy in a way that the show has always found funny, and occasionally, in its best moments, genuinely moving. Mo's misery is specific and real in the way that the best Simpsons supporting characters' qualities are specific and real. The idea that Mo has a hidden talent for judging, that his natural bluntness and his complete indifference to other people's feelings would translate into exactly the kind of cutting, honest critique that competition show audiences respond to is not a bad idea. It is actually a fairly good Simpsons idea. Mo's honesty is not cruelty. It is the honesty of a man who stopped caring what people think of him a long time ago, who says what he sees because he has nothing to lose by saying it, and who is surprised when other people find that quality valuable. The episode begins at an ugly dog contest in Springfield, where Krusty the Clown is revealed to be a poor judge, too soft, too easily swayed, too unwilling to say the harsh thing that the situation requires. Mo steps in and immediately demonstrates that he has no such problem. He is honest about the dogs in a way that is funny and a little brutal and entirely convincing. The crowd responds. Springfield recognizes a talent, and the story begins moving toward Mo's eventual recruitment by American Idol. This part of the episode, the Springfield-based setup, is the part that works. It is recognizable Simpsons territory. Mo as an unlikely talent being discovered by his own community, the town collectively realizing that one of their most overlooked residents has a skill that none of them expected. This is the kind of story the show tells well. It has the warmth and the Springfield-specific texture that the best episodes carry. The problem arrives when the episode leaves Springfield and goes to American Idol. Simon Cowell was at the time the most famous judge on American Idol. His willingness to tell contestants clearly and without softening that their performance was not good enough had made him famous, had made the show famous, and had made the particular dynamic of the judging panel, Cowell as the harsh truth teller, the other judges as more supportive voices, into one of the most watched things on American television. He had appeared on The Simpsons before, in season 15, playing a character called Henry. His second appearance, in Judge Me Tender, had him playing himself. Cowell's role in the episode's plot is to see Mo as a threat. When Mo joins the American Idol panel, audiences respond to him immediately. He is funny and direct and real in a way that cuts through the usual American Idol atmosphere. Cowell recognizes that Mo could potentially replace him, that the network might prefer Mo's version of harsh honesty, which comes cheaper and with less celebrity baggage. So Cowell manipulates Mo. He convinces Mo to be kinder on the judging panel, to soften his critiques, to appeal to the contestants' emotions rather than their actual performance. Mo does this. The audiences stop responding to him. And then Cowell reveals that the advice was deliberate sabotage, that he told Mo to be nice specifically to make Mo less effective and protect his own position. This is the plot's central conflict, and it is not a bad conflict. Cowell playing himself as a calculating, self-interested person who undermines a genuine talent to protect his own career is a reasonably sharp thing to do with the character. It acknowledges that the warm, supportive television personality and the competitive professional can exist in the same person, and that the competition behind the scenes of a show like American Idol is at least as intense as the competition happening on its stage. The problem is that the episode never commits to this sharpness. It acknowledges it, delivers it, and then moves past it without really letting it land. Mo discovers the betrayal. He is angry. He threatens Cowell in the specific way that Mo threatens people, with violence, described in colorful terms, without any real expectation that the violence will actually occur. He returns to Springfield. He reopens his bar. Life goes on. There is no real reckoning. There is no moment where the episode uses Mo's story to say something about American Idol, about the entertainment industry, about what happens to real people when they enter the machinery of commercial television and discover that the machinery is not interested in them as people. The show gets close to those ideas and then steps back from them, and what remains is a resolution that feels quick and a little hollow. Ellen DeGeneres appears in the episode as herself, in her role as an American Idol judge. This casting drew specific criticism from reviewers at the time, and the criticism is worth engaging with honestly. DeGeneres is a skilled comedian and performer. She had been a voice actress in major productions. She voiced Dory in Finding Nemo, which is one of the most beloved animated performances of its era. She clearly had the ability to do voice work. In Judge Me Tender, her performance as herself is widely considered flat. Not funny, not memorable, not adding anything to the episode that could not have been achieved by simply having her character say her lines without her involvement. The issue is not DeGeneres specifically. It is a problem that affects almost all the guest appearances in this episode. When celebrities play themselves in a Simpsons crossover, the comedy requires the show to find something specific and funny about who those people are, to use their public persona as material. The Springfield Files found something specific and funny about Mulder and Scully. A Star is Burns found something specific about Jay Sherman. Judge Me Tender, for most of its guest appearances, does not find anything specific. The judges are there, they say lines, they do not become characters, they remain recognizable faces, doing recognizable things in a context that does not transform either them or the context. Randy Jackson appears briefly, Ryan Seacrest appears briefly, Cara DioGuardi appears briefly. None of them have moments. None of them are used in a way that could not have been accomplished with voice actors doing impressions. Their actual presence adds brand recognition but not comedy, and The Simpsons, at its best, does not settle for brand recognition. The subplot of the episode involves Homer, who finds himself with more time at home than usual because Moe's bar is closed during Moe's time in Los Angeles. Homer spending his days at home drives Marge crazy, which is a workable Simpsons premise, the kind of domestic comedy the show has always done well. But the subplot is thin and does not connect meaningfully to the main story. It exists alongside the American Idol plot, rather than in conversation with it, which makes the episode feel like two separate half-stories sharing a runtime rather than one complete episode. There is also a third thread involving Lisa and Santa's little helper, the family's dog, who wins the ugly dog contest at the beginning of the episode under the name Satan's Little Helper, after the Simpsons disguise his rear end to look like a face. Santa's Little Helper is upset about this for reasons that make sense if you spend a moment thinking about it from the dog's perspective. Lisa tries to comfort him. These scenes are brief and quiet, and actually contain some of the episode's gentler comedy, but they are not enough to anchor the episode alongside a main plot that keeps moving but never quite arrives anywhere. The episode aired as the Season 21 finale. Season finales are supposed to carry some weight, a conclusion to what the season has been building toward, a moment that sends the audience into the summer with something to think about. Judge Me Tender, as a finale, is remarkably low stakes. Moe goes to Hollywood, gets manipulated, comes home. Homer is too present, then less present. The dog wins a contest and feels bad about it. Rupert Murdoch appears in the episode as himself, in a scene at Moe's bar after Moe returns from Los Angeles. This is Murdoch's second appearance on the show. He appeared previously in the Season 10 episode, Sunday, Cruddy Sunday. In Judge Me Tender, the joke involving him is a brief moment of biting the hand humor. Moe's Bar is banned from showing Fox content, which causes business to boom, with Murdoch himself coming in to suggest the patrons watch NBC instead. It is a funny joke, delivered quickly, and it is easily the sharpest moment in the episode. It is also over in about 15 seconds. Jay Leno makes an appearance at the very end of the episode on The Jay Leno Show, making a joke about the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, the massive environmental disaster that was in the news at the time the episode aired. This ending, a reference to a real tragedy, dropped into the last few seconds of a season 21 finale built around an American Idol crossover, lands with a thud that the episode cannot recover from because the episode is already over. Judge Me Tender is not a disaster. It is not incompetent. It is not mean-spirited or offensive in ways that leave a bad taste. It is simply, and perhaps most disappointingly, not very much of anything. It is an episode that had a workable premise, a potentially interesting central conflict, and a cast of real-world celebrities who brought recognition without bringing comedy, and that added up to something forgettable in a way that The Simpsons crossover episodes rarely are. The Simpsons has always been at its best when it uses the world outside Springfield to say something about Springfield, or to say something about that outside world that could only be said from Springfield's specific angle of view. Judge Me Tender uses American Idol without saying much about American Idol, and it uses Moe without saying much about Moe that the show has not said better in dozens of other episodes. It is the crossover that proves something the other entries on this list also prove, each in their own way. Having access to another show's characters and brand is not by itself enough. What matters is what you do with the access once you have it. The Springfield Files had access to Mulder and Scully, and used that access to build one of the greatest episodes in television history. Judge Me Tender had access to the full American Idol judging panel, and used that access to build something that most people have largely forgotten. The gap between those two outcomes is the whole story of what makes a crossover work. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What comes next is perhaps the most unusual entry on this entire list. An episode so strange, so unexpected in its choice of crossover partner, that most viewers who watch it without knowing the history have no idea they are watching a crossover at all. It is an episode where Homer builds a fake news website, gets too popular for his own good, and ends up imprisoned on a mysterious island that is a direct recreation of a British science fiction show from the 1960s that most of its audience had never heard of, and that turned out to be one of the most quietly brilliant things the show ever did. Section 9, The Computer Wore Menace Shoes, Season 12, Episode 6, 2000. The most obscure crossover, Homer meets the prisoner. Most people who watch The Computer Wore Menace Shoes do not realize they are watching a crossover. That is not a criticism, it is actually one of the most interesting things about the episode. Every other crossover on this list announces itself clearly. The Springfield Files puts Mulder and Scully in the title card and builds the entire episode around their presence. A Star is Burns centers its plot on a character from another show. Simpsorama is literally named after both shows it is combining. The Simpsons Guy ran promotional material for months before it aired. Even 24 Minutes, which is more parody than traditional crossover, makes its reference point unmistakable from the first frame. The Computer Wore Menace Shoes, which aired on December 3, 2000, as the 6th episode of Season 12, does something completely different. For its first half, it is a recognizable and funny Simpsons episode about Homer discovering the internet and accidentally becoming a popular anonymous blogger. The crossover element does not arrive until the second half, when the episode takes a sharp left turn into territory so specific, so rooted in the details of a particular British television show from the 1960s that a large portion of the audience watching it in 2000 would have had no idea where the story was going or what it was referencing. The show it is referencing is called The Prisoner. The Prisoner was a British television series that aired from 1967 to 1968. It ran for 17 episodes. It was created by and starred a Welsh actor named Patrick McGoohan, who played a character known only as Number 6. The show began with Number 6, a former secret agent, suddenly resigning from his government job and then waking up in a strange, beautiful, impossible village from which he cannot escape. The village looks like a resort. The people in it are friendly and the weather is pleasant. And there are pleasant activities to participate in and pleasant food to eat. But nobody is allowed to leave. Nobody is allowed to use their real name. Everyone is assigned a number. And a mysterious authority, represented by a rotating cast of characters all known as Number 2, works continuously to find out why Number 6 resigned. Number 6 refuses to tell them. He tries to escape. He fails. Every episode he tries something different. Every episode, something in the village stops him. The show was unlike anything else on British television at the time, and it remained unlike almost anything else on television for decades after it ended. It was strange and philosophical, and sometimes genuinely frightening, and it asked questions about individual freedom, about the relationship between a person and the systems that control them, about whether identity can survive in an environment designed to strip it away. It developed a devoted following over the years, particularly in America, where it aired on CBS and then lived in reruns and on home video, gradually accumulating the kind of intense fan community that gathers around shows that feel like they are saying something important, even when the specifics of what they are saying are hard to pin down. By the year 2000, The Prisoner was not a show that most casual television viewers were familiar with. It was a cult show, beloved by the people who knew it, unknown to most people who did not. Choosing it as the crossover partner for a Simpsons episode was, by any reasonable measure, an unusual decision. The Springfield Files chose the X-Files at the peak of its popularity. Judge B. Tender chose American Idol at the peak of its popularity. The computer wore Menace shoes chose a 17-episode British series that had ended 32 years earlier and that most of its audience had never seen. That choice is what makes the episode worth discussing at this level of detail. The first half of the episode is the Simpsons story. Homer discovers that his co-workers at the nuclear power plant have been receiving awards and recognitions that he has not been getting because he does not have a computer. He gets a computer. He tries to use it for various purposes that do not work out. He eventually stumbles into creating an anonymous website called Mr. X, where he posts rumors and gossip about Springfield, things he has overheard, things he has noticed, small scandals and embarrassing details about the people in his community that he shares with the internet without identifying himself. The website becomes enormously popular. People love Mr. X. They share his posts. They discuss his revelations. Springfield becomes obsessed with figuring out who this anonymous source of local gossip is. Homer, who is almost never the most powerful person in any room, experiences what it feels like to have information and to have people hanging on that information, and he enjoys it in the way that Homer enjoys almost everything, completely, without much thought for the consequences. The consequences arrive when Homer runs out of real gossip. He knows everything interesting that is happening in Springfield, and he has posted all of it. He has nothing left, and his audience, now large and demanding, and accustomed to a regular supply of scandal, wants more. Homer's solution is to start making things up. He fabricates stories. He posts fake gossip as if it were real. His site remains popular. Nobody can tell the difference. This section of the episode, which aired in December 2000, is about fake news on the internet. It is about anonymous online sources, about the appetite for scandal and gossip, about what happens when an audience stops caring whether the information they are consuming is true and starts caring only whether it is interesting. Homer is not a journalist. He is not even trying to be a journalist. He is just a man who discovered that people will read anything if it is delivered with enough confidence, and who took advantage of that discovery until it got him into trouble. The fake news angle of the computer wore Menace shoes has become significantly more relevant in the years since the episode aired than it was when it was first broadcast. In 2000, the internet existed, but social media did not. Anonymous online gossip was a real phenomenon, but it had not yet reached the scale or the cultural centrality that it would eventually achieve. The episode was looking at something real and growing, and pointing at where it was headed. And the place it was headed turned out to be more serious and more consequential than a Simpsons episode from 2000 could fully account for. This is what happens when Homer gets too popular. A shadowy organization that does not want its secrets exposed decides to remove him from circulation. They kidnap Homer and take him to a place called the Island. The Island is where the prisoner arrives. Everything about the island in this episode is a direct recreation of the village from The Prisoner. The architecture is the same. Colorful, pleasant, slightly wrong in the way that beautiful places sometimes feel wrong when you cannot leave them. The rules are the same. No real names, only numbers. No communication with the outside world, no escape. The authority figure is the same, a rotating number 2 who interviews Homer and tries to get him to reveal information. The giant white weather balloon that pursues escaping prisoners in the original show appears in the episode and pursues Homer when he tries to run. Everything that a viewer familiar with the prisoner would recognize is there, faithfully reproduced, filtered through Springfield's visual style. Patrick McGoohan, who created The Prisoner and played its main character, came to voice his character number 6 in this episode. This is an extraordinary thing when you consider it fully. McGoohan was not a person who made frequent television appearances. He was not someone who regularly agreed to reprise old roles or participate in tribute projects. He was selective in a way that most Hollywood figures are not, and he had a reputation for being particular about the work he agreed to do. The fact that he agreed to appear in a Simpsons episode, to voice number 6 alongside Homer Simpson in a plot that was part fake news comedy and part philosophical science fiction, says something about how the episode approached the material. McGoohan's presence is brief. His number 6 appears on the island and has a limited number of interactions with Homer. He does not have a large role, but his voice, specific, careful, carrying the weight of a character he had lived with for decades, gives the episode's island sequences an authenticity that they could not have achieved any other way. He is not doing a cameo in the way that many celebrity guests do cameos, showing up to be recognized and then disappearing. He is playing his character with the same commitment the character deserved. Homer on the island is Homer in a situation that has nothing to do with his normal life and everything to do with the themes that The Prisoner built its 17 episodes around. Number 6 refused to explain himself to the people who imprisoned him because he believed that his reasons were his own, that a person's interior life, their motivations, their private decisions were not the property of the system they lived in. Homer is being held on the island because he knows things that powerful people do not want shared. In a different kind of story, that would make Homer a hero in the mold of number 6, a person who holds on to their truth despite pressure to give it up. Homer is not quite that. Homer is Homer. His resistance to the island's interrogation is less philosophical defiance and more the fact that Homer does not always understand what is being asked of him, which produces a comedy that is different from the suspense of the original, but that has its own logic. The joke is not that Homer is a lesser version of number 6. The joke is that the machinery designed to break a brilliant, principled secret agent is completely unprepared for a man who mostly wants a snack and is confused about the numbering system. The episode's title is a reference to a 1969 comedy film called The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes, which starred Kurt Russell. The Simpsons changed one word, tennis to menace, and used the structure of that title to signal that the episode was going to involve a computer doing something it should not. It is a small joke hidden in the episode's name, the kind of layered reference that the show's writers specialized in, and that rewards viewers who catch it without punishing viewers who do not. The resolution of the episode is quick and a little chaotic, as Simpsons resolutions often are. Homer escapes the island. He returns to Springfield. The website continues. The fake news problem is not really solved. The episode ends with a forward momentum that does not particularly concern itself with wrapping everything up neatly, which is consistent with the show's approach to Homer causes chaos plots. The chaos happened, it was funny, life continues. What lingers is the island sequence and what it was attempting. In the middle of a season 12 episode about the early internet, The Simpsons reached back 32 years to a British cult classic about individual freedom and institutional control, reproduced its visual world with genuine care, brought back its creator to voice his character one more time, and used the collision between Homer's cheerful obliviousness and Number 6's principled resistance to find a comedy that neither show could have produced alone. Most viewers who watched the episode in 2000 did not know what they were watching in the island sequences. They knew it was strange. They knew the visual style had changed, and the logic of the story had shifted. They knew Homer was somewhere that was not Springfield, and that the rules of that somewhere were different from any rules Springfield operated on. They found it funny without knowing exactly why. Viewers who knew the prisoner found something else. They found a show they loved being treated with respect by a show that did not need to reference it at all, brought in not for brand recognition, not for promotional purposes, not because the prisoner was currently popular or profitable, but because the writers thought it was the right story for the episode they were making. That is an unusual reason for a crossover. It is also the best possible reason. The Simpsons chose The Prisoner because it fit, not because it was famous, not because it would bring in viewers, not because a network executive suggested it, because a group of writers making a story about fake news and surveillance and the removal of inconvenient voices from the public conversation looked at a 17-episode British series from 1967 and recognized that its world was exactly the right container for the story they needed to tell in the second half of their episode. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The last crossover on this list is the one that arrived the most quietly of all, the one that most people do not think of as a crossover at all when they first encounter it. It is an episode from Season 9, where Springfield plays a football game against a town called Arlen, Texas, and the people sitting in the visiting bleachers are characters from a different animated Fox show about a propane salesman and his family. It is brief, it is easy to miss, and it is a small, warm, entirely unnecessary gesture between two shows that were often compared and rarely celebrated together. And that is exactly what makes it worth talking about last. Section 10, Bart Star, Season 9, Episode 6, 1997. The King of the Hill cameo that technically counts. Not every crossover arrives with a fanfare. Not every crossover gets a promotional campaign or a special runtime or a title card that announces its own importance. Not every crossover is built around the guest characters or structured so that the outside world is the engine of the story. Some crossovers are quieter than that. Some crossovers are a handful of seconds in the middle of an episode that is about something else entirely. A brief moment where two animated worlds share the same frame without making a big deal of it, and then part ways and go back to their separate lives as if nothing happened. Bart Star is that kind of crossover. It aired on November 9th, 1997, as the 6th episode of Season 9. It is an episode about Homer coaching Bart's youth football team, about the complicated and occasionally painful relationship between a father who wants his son to succeed and a son who is not always sure he wants what his father wants for him. It is a solid Season 9 episode, Not a classic in the way that the Springfield Files is a classic, not a landmark in the way that A Star is Burns is a landmark, but a well-constructed half-hour with genuine comedy and a subplot involving Joe Namath, the famous real-life football player, that pays off in a way that is both surprising and completely earned. And in the middle of all of that, for a brief, easy-to-miss moment during a football game between Springfield and a team from Arlen, Texas, Hank Hill and the cast of King of the Hill appear in the visiting bleachers. King of the Hill was an animated Fox show created by Mike Judge and Greg Daniels. It premiered on January 12, 1997, the same night as the Springfield Files, which is a coincidence worth noting. The show was set in the fictional small town of Arlen, Texas, and followed Hank Hill, a propane salesman who is deeply committed to his family, his neighborhood, his lawn, and the correct way of doing things. Hank was conservative, sincere, occasionally rigid, and genuinely decent, a character built on the idea that ordinary life, lived with integrity and care, was worth taking seriously and worth finding funny. King of the Hill was frequently compared to The Simpsons. Both were animated family comedies on Fox. Both featured a working-class father at their center. Both used their fictional towns as a way of examining American life and American values. The comparisons were inevitable and in many ways fair, but they obscured the significant differences between the two shows. Differences in tone, in style, in what they thought was funny, and why. The Simpsons operated at a level of absurdity that King of the Hill deliberately did not. Springfield is a town where the laws of physics bend for comedy, where a man can fall off a cliff multiple times and return unharmed, where an octopus can appear in a swimming pool for a single joke and then never be mentioned again. Arlen, Texas was not that kind of town. King of the Hill was committed to a version of realism that The Simpsons had never attempted. Its characters aged somewhat. Its stories had consequences that carried forward. Its comedy came from recognizable human behavior rather than from the show's willingness to do anything for a laugh. These two different shows sharing a moment in a Season 9 football episode is, when you think about it, a genuinely strange thing. The Simpsons was the established giant. King of the Hill was brand new. It had premiered less than 10 months before Bart Star aired. The two shows were on the same network, airing on the same night, occupying adjacent slots in Fox's Sunday animation lineup. They were neighbors in the television schedule, competing for some of the same viewers, inevitably compared by critics and audiences who watched both. The crossover in Bart Star handles all of that history with a lightness that is almost disarming. During Springfield's football game against Arlen, the camera cuts to the visiting bleachers. Sitting there watching the game are Hank Hill, his wife Peggy, his son Bobby, and his friend Boomhauer. Recognizable King of the Hill characters rendered in their own visual style rather than converted into Simpsons-style animation. Mike Judge, who created King of the Hill and voiced Hank Hill, provided the voice for the cameo. Hank's line is simple and specific and characteristically Hank. "We drove 2,000 miles for this? That is it. That is the crossover. One line. A handful of seconds. The King of the Hill characters appear. Hank expresses his dissatisfaction in the tone of a man who expected more from a road trip and is disappointed but not surprised to have received less, and the episode moves on. The joke works on multiple levels, and unpacking them reveals how carefully even a brief throwaway moment in a Simpsons episode can be constructed. On the surface, it is just funny that Hank drove 2,000 miles to watch a youth football game between animated small towns, and that his response to arriving is the same mildly exasperated disappointment that defines him as a character. The line is completely in character. Anyone who knows King of the Hill hears that line and immediately knows exactly how Hank sounds saying it, exactly what expression is on his face, exactly how he is holding his body while he watches the game and finds it lacking. But underneath the surface joke, there is a secondary joke that operates through the specific number, 2,000 miles, Arlen, Texas to Springfield. The Simpsons has never definitively revealed where Springfield is located. The show has maintained the ambiguity of Springfield's geographic position as a deliberate joke for its entire run, giving contradictory clues across hundreds of episodes and never committing to a real state or a real location. 2,000 miles from Arlen could put Springfield almost anywhere in the continental United States. The line acknowledges the crossover without acknowledging the crossover. It puts a King of the Hill character in a Simpsons episode and gives him a line that is funny precisely because it is such a Hank Hill response to being in a Simpsons episode without ever saying so. Mike Judge's involvement matters here. Judge created King of the Hill, voiced its main character, and was one of the most respected figures in animation at the time Bart Star aired. He did not have to agree to the cameo. A brief appearance of King of the Hill characters in a Simpsons episode could have been handled with sound-alike voice actors or reduced to a purely visual appearance without dialogue. The fact that Judge came in and voiced Hank for a single line is a creative gesture, a choice made because it was the right thing for the moment, not because it was required. The Simpsons Wiki notes that brief crossover cameos, like Hank Hill's appearance in Bart Star, do not belong in the same category as full crossover episodes where the outside characters are essential to the plot. The Simpsons' official crossover episode category requires that the crossover be central to the story. By that standard, Bart Star is not a crossover episode. It is an episode with a crossover moment. That distinction is worth sitting with. This entire video essay has been about crossovers, where another show's world was essential to what The Simpsons was doing, where the outside reference was the engine of the story, or the center of the comedy, or the thing that made the episode what it was. Bart Star is different because the King of the Hill appearance does not change anything about the episode's story. Remove those few seconds from Bart Star, and the episode is exactly the same. The football game still happens. Homer still coaches the team in his particular way. Bart still navigates his relationship with his father. Joe Namath still shows up at the end in a payoff that works beautifully. The King of the Hill moment is not load-bearing. It does not hold anything up. It is a gift, a small, warm, entirely unnecessary present offered to viewers who happen to watch both shows. A moment of acknowledgement between two animated worlds that shared a network and a time slot, and a broad category of animated family comedy, without ever quite occupying the same creative space. That quality, the unnecessary generosity of it, is actually what makes the Bart Star cameo feel different from the other crossovers on this list, rather than lesser than them. Every other crossover on this list had a purpose beyond the simple pleasure of the meeting. The Springfield Files was a brilliant comedy built around two universes colliding. Simpsorama was a long-delayed fulfillment of a promise that 2 decades of shared creative lineage had implied. The Simpsons Guy was a television event that 10 million people watched because both shows were popular, and the collision of their main characters was something the culture had been waiting to see. Even the weaker crossovers, Judge Me Tender, the brief PBS chase in Missionary Impossible, were driven by something external, a promotional relationship, a network strategy, a creative experiment. Hank Hill appeared in the Bart Star bleachers because someone thought it would be a good joke. That is the whole reason. The shows were neighbors. Arlen was playing Springfield in a youth football game. It made sense for the people from Arlen to be watching, and the people from Arlen, in this case, happened to be Hank and Peggy and Bobby and Boomhauer, rendered in their own visual style, present for one line and then gone. The episode itself, the one the cameo is embedded in, is worth describing more fully because Bart Star is a better episode than its reputation suggests. Homer takes over as coach of Bart's Pee-wee football team after the previous coach, Ned Flanders, is quietly moved aside in the way that Homer moves people aside when he decides he wants something they have. Homer's coaching style is exactly what you would expect. He makes Bart the quarterback not because Bart is the best player for the position, but because Bart is his son, and the logic of his own generosity is enough justification. Bart, who has always had a complicated relationship with Homer's approval and disapproval, and the specific weight that both carry, is put in a position he did not ask for and is not sure he wants. Nelson, who was the team's most effective player under Flanders, loses his starting position because Homer is in charge and Homer's priorities are not the team's priorities. The episode is quietly sharp about how parental love can tip into something that looks like support but functions as pressure. How giving your child every advantage can also be a way of refusing to let your child fail, which is also a way of refusing to let your child be a person rather than a project. Joe Namath's appearance at the end of the episode is earned in a way that many Simpsons celebrity cameos are not. He shows up at the Simpsons house, and the reason he is there is specific and funny and rooted in the episode's own logic rather than dropped in from outside it. His presence is a payoff rather than an interruption. The episode knows how to use him. Homer's arc in Bart Star ends with him stepping back, recognizing, in the particular way that Homer occasionally recognizes things, that what he wanted for Bart was not the same as what Bart wanted for himself, and that the difference matters. It is not a dramatic realization. It is not played with heavy music or long pauses. It is Homer being Homer, getting there by a route that no other character would take, and arriving at something true. The King of the Hill characters, sitting in the bleachers for those few seconds, watching Springfield play football and finding it insufficient, are part of the backdrop of an episode that is mostly about something else. They are the show acknowledging its neighbors, waving across the fence, saying hello without making a whole thing of it. They drove 2,000 miles, they saw what there was to see, and they went home. That is where this list ends, not with the biggest crossover or the most celebrated one, but with the smallest. A handful of animated characters from another show, sitting in bleachers for a moment, in an episode that did not need them and included them anyway. The Simpsons at its best has always known that the smallest choices carry their own kind of weight. That 2,000 miles is funnier than any number the show could have chosen. That Mike Judge voicing one line matters even if most viewers never notice. That a crossover does not have to be an event to be worth remembering. Across these 10 sections, 10 different crossovers, 10 different decisions about how to bring another world into Springfield, one thing has remained consistent. The crossovers that work are the ones where the outside element serves the Springfield story, and the crossovers that fall short are the ones where Springfield serves the outside element. The Springfield Files used the X-Files to make Springfield funnier and stranger. Judge Me Tender used American Idol to make American Idol more visible. The difference between those two outcomes is the difference between a show that knows what it is and a show that is briefly unsure. The Simpsons, across 35 years and more than 700 episodes, has mostly known what it is. And the crossovers that proved it? The ones that are still being watched and talked about and written about decades after they aired are the ones where Springfield stayed Springfield, even while something from another world was visiting. The show did not become something else for its guests. It invited the guests into what it already was, and what it already was turned out to be more than enough. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.